just in case if you're joining us right now, this is the State of the Nation, where we talk politics and matters, everything in between. And of course, tonight we are taking a look at a very important discussion, and they say the country could be facing, or rather could be staring at, a constitutional crisis. Remember, it has been over a year without, the proper functioning of the IEBC commissioners. And remember, the time for the review of the boundary is just somewhere around the corner, and with that, still the state of the IEBC is not yet known, and how the country can actually operate amid all this, some sort of confusion as far as an independent electoral and boundary commission is concerned. And of course, to help us unpack this, very important discussion and topic for that matter is Professor Fred Ogola, Governance and Policy Analyst. Prof, thank you so much for making time.
Thank you very much, Omar.
All right. Well, Prof, when you take a look at all these the things that are happening around the Independent Electoral and Boundary Commission, without the country does not have a proper functioning IEBC officials. We are just the dates set for boundary reviews are just somewhere around the corner, and of course there are like at least five by-elections that have not been held, and of course this to some extent has denied Kenyans in those particular areas their right to actually be represented, and this creates some sort of the confusion regarding the fate of the IEBC. Well, Prof, I'll begin by asking you, did we make a mistake in disbanding the IEBC commission, and of course without a proper plan?
Yeah, thank you very much, my brother. I think that first and foremost, this constitutional crisis I don't think it is something which has caught us by a surprise, because remember, immediately the president won the election and was sworn in, he went in to start the process of constituting IEBC. And of course, the opposition took that to go to the street by saying that the president cannot unilaterally be able to consider the IEBC without consulting the opposition. And that was one of the reasons why, adding to cost of living, among other issues, like Sava sent them to the streets. Remember, by the time they're going to the street, they already had a select panel, which if the Mandamano did not take place, by now we could have actually IEBC commissioners, because the select panel had been sworn in into office, and they had actually called for application for Kenyans who are willing to serve in the commission, and people applied. There was just now a need for them to be shortlisted, gazetted, and therefore the interviews begin. So the process was already there. But you see, the people who tried to disrupt this process was actually opposition. But of course, we don't want to blame the opposition, because they would not be stopped from going to the seat because of IBC. At the same time, the opposition was saying that if we go to election with the IBC selected by one side, then they will bring legitimate issues about the election. And I think the president and the Kenya Kwanza government agreed with them, and they began the process. Unfortunately, we thought that NADCO report was supposed to be fast-tracked and lead to the establishment of an IBC commission. But now you see there's a standoff between the opposition and the Kenya Kwanza government. Unfortunately, so that opposition took Kenyans to the street, and then instead of focusing on getting the results which was supposed to gotten from through NADCO report, now we're having a situation whereby NADCO reports looks like a baby, looks like a baby who is an orphan. So it looks like Kenya Kwanza doesn't want to let with it. Azimio says that report is among the most useless report, like all other commissions, and it has actually spent the Kenyan money. So I think that is not fair. But nevertheless, what you are saying, constitutional crisis, there is likelihood of a constitutional crisis. Nevertheless, there is the doctrine of necessity. In case there would be a crisis of that point, still there are provisions that actually can allow us to move on. Our life cannot end, because even if you put the commission's office today, if they are selected today, they still cannot be able, within the timelines given, be able to delineate the boundaries. But also, don't forget the fact that the Boundaries Commission is a hot potato. Why am I trying to say it's a hot potato? It was supposed to be done during President Uhuru Kenyatta's tenure, but realizing that if he was supposed to cut the boundaries, because some constituencies do not even qualify to be constituencies. For example, if you look at Lamu County, which has a population of around 74,000 voters, and yet we have a constituency which has over 200,000 voters. There are some counties that have less voters than actually some constituencies. So will they cease to be counties? How will you be able to delineate these boundaries? Which means that some positions might be wiped out. I don't know, politicians. Should you take out any county from them, yet some of them want more counties added? Or should you wipe out some constituency using the quota system proposed by the Constitution? You may realize that could have actually caused trouble. So what happened is that Uhuru Kenyatta pushed the bucket to Ruto by saying, we have 2 more years, and judges were able to declare that we have more 2 years, and those 2 years are now falling right into William Ruto's first years of presidency, and that's why he is a hot potato. William Ruto finds also a hot potato because should he cut the number of representations now, means some members of parliament might lose their jobs, and remember that some of them might actually start now looking for ways to dig him, to fight him. Remember, they can actually gang up with opposition and even do impeachment. So it's a very hot potato for William Ruto. But even Raila Odinga as well, because if some of the constituencies touch in his areas, they will also be resigning. So I can tell you, if you like it, Raila Odinga would like to talk about this matter. William Ruto fears this issue, and everybody else finds this issue a very, very sensitive issue.
Prof, let me take you back to this the NADCO report, and of course the High Court judge, that is Judge Mugure Thanda, of course, was clear about this. She said political truth does not override the Constitution, and of course that is now the big discussion that many people are having. And remember, at this particular point, we have a group that rather than NADCO report, and of course they agree on mechanism that could constitute the selection panel of the selection panel that could actually advocate or rather institute the process of now selecting the IEBC commissioners. And this is something that was agreed upon. But now the question is, when can it start? And that is the big question, because both sides are in support of this process. And this is actually one of the areas that they are in agreement as far as the selection panel is concerned. So this particular decision by the High Court that says that they do not recognize the NADCO report as anchored in the Constitution. At the same time, this is a framework that could be actually be used to now try to cure some areas, or rather some bone of contention between the two conflicting sides. Don't you think it's an area that maybe can put a country in some sort of a limbo?
I think the justice standard is very correct, because Linda Jamii, I'm the leader of Linda Jamii, we went to Bomas and I told them that NADCO committee was unconstitutional. It was not anchored on law. It cannot be referenced even within the law. It can only be expunged from court records if anybody tries to use them. And they are right that there is a political truth. In fact, the select panel can begin their work of selecting the commissioners, because actually people applied, they have the applications. They can just shortlist and go on to interview the commissioners, the applicants, and then end up to appoint the commissioners. They can actually go on and do that. And I do not think there's a crisis. The only crisis is the time period for the boundaries delimitation. But what we can do is that the boundaries are delineated now, they might not affect the next election, because that's why the Constitution is very clear that how long do we need to do them before the next election? So they can say, Parliament can do this again. I remember Jesus said to his disciples that the law was not made, the human beings were not made for the law, but the law was made for human beings. And I'm sure that the sovereignty of the people also in the Constitution, you can revoke some articles of the Constitution to give you a breathing space so that you can push this implementation or that is the next term. So I think there's a constitutional windfall. But I saw some people saying that should the president die now and his deputy, who actually can be able to continue? Remember that the arms of government we have the judiciary, we have the legislature, we have the executive. you could even see either the head of the judiciary or legislature taking up oath of office and then executing that office of the presidency and ensuring that things continue. Remember, the president is the head of government, which means that the government has got three arms. So any of the president, either of parliament or that of the Supreme Court, can still be able to move on. So I do not see whether there is a crisis as such. There might be a political crisis, but not necessarily a constitutional crisis. Because if these people die, and what are the chances they are going to die? No, I think also we have to believe that they are going to be alive. But at the same time, faith is not a strategy. So I see that there's a bit of a challenge, if you like. There's a bit of, let's say, unease, but I won't call it a crisis, because the fathers of the Constitution could have not just forgotten some clauses that can help as a landing clause. What people are fearing is that what if there is any challenge with the president that he cannot be able to function from office? Maybe he could be able to get deputy who might pick up the commissioners unilaterally who need to go for an election, which will be a snap election within 90 days. Those are just fears, but there is no constitutional crisis as such.
Prof, when you look at the whole issue, we have like the date set for boundary reviews is on 24th. That is the time. So it's just a couple of days before the lapsing of that set time, and there is some constituency that could actually be affected. For example, let's say a constituency like Othaya, for instance. When we don't do these reviews, the boundary reviews as stated by the Constitution, don't you think the people from Othaya constituency could be actually affected by this delayed boundary reviews as stated in the Constitution? Don't you think that could put some sort of a crisis, the constitutional crisis?
The Constitution is clear, Evans, that if you do not review them by that date, then these constituencies that were supposed to be reviewed disappears. Is that what the Constitution says? If it says so, then of course the people of Othaya will have suffered. But then it's not a permanent damage, because then there must be a timeline on which another review will be scheduled. Of course, that might take long. Remember also, the Constitution is not self-deterministic. Remember also, we have parliament that can still be able to make laws. They can go and amend that part of the Constitution. Remember, you just need to pass a bill in parliament and amend that act, and that act becomes law, and therefore is not binding. So there are still provisions that can have. They can even go and apply for more days. And for example, that we have constitutional law. They can also be able to rule on some of the provisions, how that can be implemented. The judiciary, if you like, headed by the Supreme Court, can be called to reign upon interpretation of that issue when crisis emerges. Remember, there was a time when there was a crisis as to when exactly is the Constitution saying we need to have an election. And Supreme Court made a decision, and that's why nowadays we vote the day we vote, because people used to vote in December. And the Constitution of 2010 wasn't clear exactly which date during time when Kibaki was the president. So remember, those things are always there. But whenever there's a constitutional challenge, we have judiciary that can be able to interpret the circumstances. I'm sure even in our families, we have people whom, when there's a challenge, there are prophets who can prophesy how things need to happen. So the people trying to create a crisis are just trying to say there's a crisis. There's just people who feel unease. Kuna tumbo joto, lakini hatuwezi sema kuna crisis. That's my position. But nevertheless, it's going to affect some people positively and some people negatively. For example, the people of Othaya, when now their position is questionable, whether they are going to have a member of parliament or not, those things creates an ease. But I can tell you, even if those constituencies disappear, they will still we should find mechanisms upon which the people of Othaya can still get government services, because this country is overrepresented. I see we have almost 300 members of parliament. Why do we need them? Yet they do nothing. Sometimes you find that people feel the members of parliament left them a long time ago. They passed a very bad draconian bill that is really giving people a lot of challenge, that the court has actually gone into reigning to block it from being implemented. So imagine what the MPs decided. Judiciary has come to turn around, which means that there are still more provisions for us to be able to run this country without over-relying on these MPs. So I believe people there should remain peaceful. Remember that if it's about CDF, every region, they can actually be found themselves in another county, and maybe they can go to parliament and allocate more money to those constituencies which will be made whenever they are going to be reviewed. So I do not see a serious challenge as such. Nevertheless, I can tell you, we are here because the president, this is my guess, and also Raila Odinga feels that this is the right place to be. What are these people fearing? These people are fearing because there are so many Kenyans who came with so many bills who want to take to IEBC, but the fact that there's no IEBC, people cannot amend. Remember Linda Jamii, where I'm a leader, came up with a bill that we should recommend that any sitting deputy president cannot contest for an election immediately his boss leaves office to avoid.
Right. Well, that is some bit of technical hitch here and there, and of course we are working on that. Of course, this is quite a very interesting discussion about the state of affairs. We call it the state of the nation, as far as matters politics, governance, and leadership is concerned. And we are taking toll on matters to do with the crisis, the sort of the looming crisis in the Independent Electoral and Boundary Commission. And of course, the country has been without the functioning commissioners for almost a year, or rather maybe 1 year and some few months in regard to that. And of course, we have some boundaries, of course, that we need to review in just a matter of time, because the set date is almost lapsing. And because of that, so that is the discussion that we have been taking toll on, giving track, and taking sharp focus on what is happening as far as the state of the nation is concerned.